A little bit of trouble today with my Wi-Fi. It's holiday up here. There, it's Carnival here in Panama, and Carnival is the craziest time of the year for uh, tourists in our little town. So our little town normally has about 6,000 full-time residents, uh, and but it's a big tourist destination, and rightly so because it's absolutely beautiful. It's about 75 degrees all year round, and safe, tranquil, peaceful, very lush and green. You can see parrots and toucans flying around up here. It's a beautiful, beautiful place to live. But uh, on the busy weekends of the year, which is only a few, it is an absolute madhouse, and this weekend is no exception. It's we can easily have 35, 40,000 people descend on our town of 6,000 on weekends like this. So it took me 10 minutes yesterday to drive about 300 yards on the main street of our town because it's just absolutely packed. So if you, I hope you can hear me. Seems like somebody'd be telling me if you couldn't. But anyway, so one of the problems that we have on weekends like this is that there's so much demand for utilities that the power goes out, the water goes out, the internet goes out, like everything is just struggling uh, on a day like today. So I've been really struggling with our internet actually for more than a week. But so I have to come outside and just go use the um, cellular data on my phone. But it is what it is. This is if that's the price we have to pay to live in a place like this, then I think we can handle it. It's the benefits are much more than the drawbacks for living up here. That's for sure. But anyway, I wanted to talk to you about a war that a lot of people are not really tracking right now. It's in the uh, Western Hemisphere, uh, in well, Southern Hemisphere and the Western Hemisphere, in South America, between Venezuela and its neighbor Guyana. Now, you probably have not thought much about Guyana in your entire life. If you did, you thought, oh, that isn't that where they drank the Kool-Aid and everybody died or something like that. That was actually French Guyana. You say, oh, well, maybe that's where they had that the island, Devil's Island prison, from that movie. And no, that's not where the that was also French Guyana. So Guyana is really has been just a kind of nothing of a country um, as far as most people's attention has been concerned. It's only got 800,000 people that live there in the entire country. It's about the size of the state of Florida, and it's so inconsequential to Venezuela that there literally is not one single road between Venezuela and Guyana uh, at all. I mean, nothing. It's just jungle out there. Nothing. Uh, so the country of Guyana is split into two parts. Two-thirds of the country in the west is called Essequibo, and the other third of the country is where most of the people live. So in Essequibo, there are only 128,000 people. Again, this is a part of the country that is almost as big as Florida by itself. That's pretty amazing. It is literally half as well populated as Lapland in the clear up in the Arctic Circle. So it's one of the least populated places on planet Earth. It's just all jungle out there. The villages that are out there are indigenous villages. There are no roads to get to them. You have to take a boat up a river or something like that to get into these villages. And so super remote area. And so you would wonder why exactly would we'd be about to have a war over this piece of land. And to understand that, we have to go back a little bit, and we have to talk about the history of this area somewhat. And I'm going to try to make this generalized and not real dry. You could get really granular on the information here, but I don't want to do that because you're not going to care about that stuff anyway. It's not that important. Basically, you go back to the colonial era, and Marty, we're talking about Guyana here. We're not talking about Israel right now. So we can talk about Israel later. We go back to Guyana, to the colonial era, and this was a region that was sort of disputed between Guyana and, well, between Great Britain and Venezuela. And when Guyana declared independence from Great Britain, they sort of inherited this conflict, this disputed border region, right? And so, long story short, they took it to court. This is before the turn of the 20th century, so like 1897, something like that. Thank you very much. Read the room. I appreciate that. They took it to court, and it took some time, but the court awarded the region to Guyana, and Venezuela was not really happy about that. So they waited until about the 1960s, and Venezuela started making noise like, we really don't trust that previous court's decision, and we want to dispute that court's finding all the way from 1897. And so they took it to the International Court of Justice in the 1960s, and they still have not completely returned a verdict on that yet. But it doesn't really matter because Venezuela has already said that they're not going to recognize anything that comes out of the International Court of Justice. So basically, Venezuela just has been like claiming this land for years. It was already decided more than 100 years ago that it didn't belong to Venezuela. And Venezuela hasn't done anything in terms of, like developing it, putting in infrastructure, searching it for minerals, mining, no offshore oil drilling, nothing. They haven't done anything. They just left it alone. And that lasted until about 2015. In 2015, Guyana, actually some international oil concerns, came and started with permission from Guyana, started doing some offshore drilling. Now, remember, Venezuela has a tremendous amount of oil. They say that Venezuela is probably the second or third largest in proven oil reserves in the world. There's two big problems with Venezuela's oil, though. It is very heavy and dirty and difficult to extract. And so heavy and dirty means that it's difficult to refine. It usually has to be mixed with oil that's lighter and sweeter than it is. But it's very difficult to refine and costly, right? The other thing is that the socialist communist country that Venezuela is, it's so corrupt, and as you probably understand, socialism does not encourage people to do their best work, right? Because socialism pays everybody the same. It's all about the equality of outcomes, not the equality of inputs. So equality of outcomes means that if you work hard or if you don't work at all, you make the same amount of money. You get the same healthcare services, you get the same education, you get the same everything. And so there's no like motivation whatsoever to work hard in in a socialist culture. There's no profit in it. And there's also a lot of sort of motivation, a lot of encouragement, so if you will, to cheat. Because if everybody is getting paid the same thing and you want to have a little more, you want to do a little better for yourself, well, then the only option available to you is to cheat, defraud, cut corners, something like that. And so those incentives are all backwards. They are all contrary to human nature. Does that make sense? So since those are all contrary to human nature, what we find is that the oil industry in Venezuela used to be cranking out like 3 million barrels a day, and now they can barely crank out a couple 100,000 barrels a day. And so in a country whose government instituted a tremendous amount of social welfare programs based on their their ability to fund those things by the oil revenue that they received, and the corruption in the country, the rampant hyperinflation that took place in the country. Hyperinflation was off the charts starting in about 2014. And that's because the government was just printing money to pay its debts. And it can't, the oil industry just tanked. And it can't make its bills. It can't continue to fund the programs it was funding. And it wasn't just in Venezuela. It was funding programs all around Latin America to try to destabilize capitalist regimes, capitalist countries like Panama and at that time Nicaragua, many other countries, try to buy people's loyalty by giving away very cheap gasoline or even subsidized gasoline to places like Haiti and El Salvador and Nicaragua and Guatemala and places like that. And those things all came to a screeching halt when the oil industry sort of tanked. The oil prices, the cost of oil declined, and they just couldn't make it with their heavy, dirty crude. And so they still have a ton of oil. They just can't get it out of the ground. Their oil industry is all, I mean, to be fair, it's not only those things. The other reason why it's difficult for Venezuela to compete in the global market for oil is that they had one of the first oil industries in the world, went back more than 100 years. And that means that a lot of their infrastructure is very, very old. And they just can't compete with modern techniques, modern equipment that's being put in places like their neighbor in Guyana. So in 2014-15, they started drilling in Guyana, started exploring offshore. And what they found was a massive, absolutely massive oil field. And just as an aside, they keep finding these massive oil fields all over the globe. And the environmentalists still keep saying that we're going to run out of fossil fuels, and we've got to go to renewable energy because these fossil fuels are going to run out. Did you know that if they did not ever find another drop of oil on the planet, and they only had to deal with the proven reserves that they currently have, that they currently know are out there, we have enough oil to last the globe at our current rate of consumption more than 3,000 years. Not only that, they keep finding more, and they keep finding more efficient ways to get it out of the ground, and they keep finding more ways to get more of the oil out of the ground that they thought they had already taken it all out of. The bottom line is we're not running out of oil. There is no shortage and will not be any shortage for hundreds of generations to come if the Lord tarries here on planet Earth. And so the push for renewable energy is really more of a push for government control over your life, because with an electric car, they can turn it off if you've hit your quota of miles already this week. Or with an electric car, they can see where you're going, and they can charge you. They can tax you on the number of miles you drive. Stuff like that. Anyway, I got off track there. I got off topic. That's a topic for a whole nother podcast that we can do at a different time. Suffice it to say that as soon as I start filming, every one of my neighbors starts sawing, hammering, honking, crashing things. It's just unbelievable how much noise goes on out here. And I'm trying very hard to focus on what I'm saying. It's just very distracting to have all that noise out there. But it's just my luck. I just have that kind of power over the universe. There's just can make things make noise. All I have to do is turn on a camera. Okay, so suffice it to say that Venezuela is sucking hard at getting oil out of the ground, and they desperately need to get better and to get more oil to fund their government so that they can fund all these social programs and stuff. Well, in 2015, they made this massive oil discovery off the coast of Guyana. And they keep finding more and more and more. And now it's like over $500 billion worth of, like 30 billion barrels of oil or something like that, that they found so far. And they keep finding more. And so Guyana went from, in 2015, 0 barrels of oil, proven barrels of oil, to now they're looking like the United Arab Emirates of South America. And they're saying that by 2027, they will be a larger oil producer than Venezuela next door. And that's got to just burn Venezuela, don't you think? That just burns Venezuela up. They got this upstart, these pipsqueaks next door, and all of a sudden they're making more money than you are. It'd be like if you built a mansion and you put all your money into it, and then you ran out of money and you can't really maintain it. And so your mansion is just like falling apart. The ceiling is caving in, the plumbing is leaking all over the place, and you just don't have the money to fix it. And you look right next door, and there was this guy that lived there in a thatch roof hut. And all of a sudden that guy just strikes it big. He just hits the lottery. And now he's building, he's over there, he's putting in a swimming pool. He's partying all the time. They're got, and you're over here and none of your friends want to be your friends anymore because you can't throw your big parties anymore. And yeah, it's just, you're looking next door and you're just like, oh, I'm so jealous. Well, that's how Venezuela feels. And because Guyana has so few people, they only have 800,000 people total in the whole country. This would allow the government of Guyana, even if they only get 2% of the profits of the oil revenues that are being taken out of Guyanese waters, they would be able to provide a standard of living that would rival Dubai for their people. And so it's already taking off. And for that reason, all of a sudden, Venezuela is looking next door and going, I think that's ours. We're going to call mine on that land right over there. The crazy thing is, none of the oil is on the land. The oil is actually just offshore. And it's actually, if you were to draw a straight line from the boundaries of Guyana offshore about 100 miles, and that's typically the exclusive economic zone, the EEZ of any country. You just take the existing boundaries, you draw lines 100 miles offshore, and that's the EEZ. That means that only that country can take minerals out of there and stuff like that. If you were to do that, all of that oil would be in Guyana's property. And even if you took out Essequibo and just took the remaining 1/3 of Guyana and did, again, like the the international law dictates and just drew a line straight offshore 100 miles, you would encompass almost all of the gas and oil that has been found offshore. But Venezuela is doing two things. First, they're saying that Essequibo we've been fighting over, yeah, that's ours. We're gonna claim that now, and we're gonna redraw those the exclusive economic zone. Instead of going straight off of the shore like this, we're gonna make it go and go that way off of Essequibo and it's going to cross in front of the rest of Guyana, and it's going to encompass all of the gas and oil, and we're going to call that ours now. That's just ours. Now, Venezuela's got a pretty sizable military force, especially in comparison to Guyana. Guyana only has 4,000 troops. They don't have enough troops to, police a parade, much less, fight Venezuela. What they do have, though, is several hundred miles of near Amazonian jungle that separates most of the populace of Guyana from Venezuela. Venezuela's got tanks, but they're not going to push tanks 400 miles through virgin rainforest. I mean, that's not going to happen. It would take them years to build a road into Guyana to the point where they could get to the existing roads in Guyana and go attack Georgetown or something like that. That would take, they'd probably never be able to do that, actually. It's hundreds of miles. It's more than the Darien Gap. There is one road that they can take from Venezuela to get into Guyana. The only problem is it goes through Brazil. They got to go south into Brazil for 100 miles or more, and then back up north into Guyana. That's actually the route that many illegal migrants take when they leave Cuba, Haiti, places like that. They come down through Guyana, go down that road into Brazil, and then cross across in Brazil, because they certainly don't want to go into Venezuela. And then they go up into Colombia and on up through the Darien Gap. So it's that road. But again, it goes through Brazil. And Brazil is not having the, they're not going to let Venezuela just like rumble a bunch of tanks through their country up into Guyana. So Brazil has already moved a bunch of armor and stuff up to the border of Venezuela to make sure that they don't try an end around like that. Okay. And so here's what Venezuela did. They're like, well, we don't really have the force to take. I mean, they've got, I don't know, probably 165,000 troops or something, if you count active and reserves, something like that. I don't know. If we have internet, I can say, how large is Venezuela's army? We can ask. The Venezuelan army is, let's see, according to my handy dandy thing here, 115,000 troops as of 2021. So 115,000 versus 4,000, I think Venezuela wins. The only problem is they can't get at each other. Venezuela's navy is not much to speak of, and it's not in very good shape. They've had a couple of their naval ships that actually crashed into each other lately, and one of them sunk. This is a couple years ago that happened. But they don't have an expeditionary force that they could stick on boats and drive around to Georgetown and then put troops on shore in Georgetown. That probably wouldn't work for them. I mean, I guess they could. That's a small possibility, but they don't even really have to do that, because what they've done is they just held a referendum. This a vote in Venezuela. I always say vote in scare quotes, because when you're voting in Venezuela, that means that the military comes around and says, here's your ballot. You're going to put it in the ballot box and vote the way we want you to, correct? Good. And we will kill your family. I mean, we won't kill your family. And then they they get all the votes are like 98, 99% for whatever the government wanted. It's amazing. So they had a referendum. They say that less than 2% of the people in Venezuela even bothered to vote. And the referendum said, do we want to take over Essequibo and claim it for our own? And everybody said, yes, we do. And so they just redrew their maps. I mean, literally, they just literally all the schools, all the colleges, all the universities, all the maps in the country overnight got redrawn to include Essequibo. Now, yesterday I talked to some Colombian men who had migrated to Panama. They're friends of mine, and I talked to them about it, and they said, "Well, you know what? When we grew up as kids in Venezuela, they always said that Essequibo was part of Venezuela. Anyway, we were always told that it was, and so, but now they really want Essequibo. And again, it's not even about Essequibo. It's about that excuse to redraw the exclusive economic zone instead of like this, and to take over all that oil. Now, why did they do that now? That's the question. I mean, obviously they want the oil, and that's important. But you know that you probably didn't know the United States has actually been training with the Guyanese military for several years, and at least 5 years. And we're doing annual training where we send troops to Guyana and we train their forces on tactical combat casualty care, uh, casualty evacuation, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Boat, maneuvers, stuff like that. And why have we done that? Well, because they're next to Venezuela. And it's a good, proxy for us to develop in case things ever did get bad with Venezuela. So while Venezuela thinks it can just say mine and claim Essequibo, now the United States is saying not so fast. Here's the problem. ExxonMobil and some other companies, Chevron, I think, was one of them. Actually, it was Hess, was the company that initially bought the rights to develop all of that area offshore in Guyana, and then Hess sold some of that out to ExxonMobil, and then Chevron, I think, bought out all of Hess's. Hess made a gazillion dollars on that. They paid $30 million for the rights for the mineral rights to that, and 8 or 9 years later, they sold it for like $45 billion or something. I mean, I mean, probably one of the most profitable oil deals in world history. It probably is. It probably is the most profitable in world history. I'm not an expert on oil stuff, but that is a very good rate of return, let's just say. And so now ExxonMobil and Chevron have paid like $40 billion already to develop all of this area and put in, offshore oil rigs and, docks onshore and that'll, all kinds of pump stations and things like that, and have paid a whole bunch to the government of Guyana. And now Venezuela is saying, by the way, that's ours, and so you owe us $40 billion. Like, wait, what? We already paid it. No, you paid the wrong people. So you owe us $40 billion. And they're like, yeah, no, we're not going to do that. And so they're just continuing to develop it. Well, now Venezuela is saying, hey, we see you developing that out there. We see you guys drilling and doing all that. You can't do that because you didn't get permission from PDVSA, from the Venezuelan state-owned oil company, which owns all that. And so there's going to be consequences if you keep it up. And ExxonMobil and Shell are going, yeah, no, don't think so. Because the United States would definitely come to their, I say definitely, they would likely come to their aid. They're not going to let ExxonMobil and Shell, American oil companies, get wiped out by a power play, a very unsavory power play on the part of Venezuela. They're just not going to let it happen. Not to mention the fact that all of this oil was likely headed, and the stuff that they're already producing is heading to Western Europe. And so here we come to the crux of the matter. Obviously, Venezuela wants the oil, wants the revenue off of that. But that's not the reason they're moving right now. The reason they're moving right now is because Russia has been trying to squeeze Western Europe because Western Europe quit buying their gas and oil. And Guyana is on the verge of producing enough gas and oil to supply most of the needs for Western Europe. And if that happens, then Russia's got no power over Western Europe whatsoever. And so Russia has been back channel encouraging Venezuela, hey, now would be a really good time for you to, that Essequibo thing, and we redraw the, hey, we think this would look good. And so that's the biggest reason why this is happening right now. Now, China actually has a small stake, or may have had a small stake. I think it still does actually, has a small stake in the offshore oil in French Guyana. Sorry, not French Guyana, in Guyana. There's I'm trying to remember the name of the Chinese oil company. It's like Chinese Offshore Oil Ventures or something like that. Anyway, they had about a 1/4 or less stake in the offshore stuff. So this could get interesting because if Russia is pushing Venezuela to, I regret that I have only one like to give. If they are pushing Venezuela to make this play now, the States steps in and gets involved. Well, what happens there? Well, that further dilutes America's attention from Ukraine. It probably is going to take some military hardware that might have gone to Ukraine or Israel, and it's going to have to go to Guyana. Guyana is not going to be able to, we can't give Guyana enough weapons for them to be able to fight Venezuela if it came down to that, because Guyana, just with 4,000 troops, they don't have enough people. But so that makes one wonder, would the United States get materially involved, get actually involved in this if it came down to it, if Venezuela, say, called their bluff? Because the United States has already started flying combat air patrols over Guyana. Did you know that? So we're now flying fighter aircraft over Guyana. That doesn't sound good. I wonder if the military of Venezuela owns many long-range missiles. I don't know about that, but what I do know is that they have recently started constructing Shahed drones. Venezuela has received the technology from Iran to build these drones, and has now built a facility in Venezuela that builds these Shahed drones. Now, those drones could reach the United States. Some of them have up to a 5,000-kilometer range. So it would be nothing for them to bomb Georgetown with those drones. And they don't have anything in the way of anti-missile defense like Israel does or like Ukraine does. So things could get really skippy in Guyana before too long. Now, Guyana knows this, and so they are cozying up to the United States. At the same time, they have been trying to have a written treaty with Venezuela saying, we won't develop that. We'll leave it alone. We won't, whatever. But that's not what Venezuela wants. Venezuela wants the gas and oil. They don't care about the land at all. And Russia is pushing them hard to get the United States to draw the US into another conflict. That will affect the United States. It will affect Israel. It will affect Ukraine. And this is the asymmetric warfare that Russia is so good at, that they are fomenting right now against the United States. The Russians are not looking for a head-to-head battle with the US. They're not looking to send their tanks up against American tanks, because they've already learned in Ukraine that their tanks will lose, and lose very badly. They're not looking to send their fighter jets up against American fighter jets, because they've already learned in Ukraine that they will lose, and lose very badly. What the Russians are trying to do is demoralize the American people. They're trying to dilute the American military power. Thank you, Emmy. I really appreciate that. Love those when they pop up. They're looking to dilute the Americans' attention. They're looking to demoralize Americans and divide Americans against each other. They're looking to pull us apart. You got factions that say we need to support Ukraine, and a big faction that says we should not be supporting Ukraine. And then that faction that says we should not be supporting Ukraine, they don't believe it. And if you're one of those, I know you won't believe it, but I've said it a million times. I'll say it a million more. You are being affected by Russian propaganda. There is no question in my mind that the vast majority of what most Americans who are against assisting Ukraine in the war believe about the war in Ukraine, and about Ukraine in general, is they are victims of Russian propaganda. If you believe that there were bioweapons labs in Ukraine, you're a victim of Russian propaganda. If you believe that Vladimir Zelensky has purchased yachts or mansions all over the world, you're a victim of Russian propaganda. If you believe that, well, I mean, we could go on and on and on, but the point is, the Russians are very good at information war, and that's the highest level of warfare. That is the kind of warfare that they excel at, that they have spent their time developing, to the extent that I would say that they are winning. And now, yeah, Venezuela currently owes $10 billion to China. That's true. And China, again, is part of this group developing the oil fields in Guyana. So without a doubt, this conflict will affect us. I've been trying to get to Guyana so that I can report directly from there, talk to the people on the ground, and I just have not had the time to go because other things keep jumping in the way. I had to go to Texas. I was going to go to Guyana, and I ended up having to go to Texas for the trucker convoy. I'm sorry about that. I would love to go. I almost went yesterday just for one day, and then just decided, what am I thinking? That's stupid. I've got to go to Burma on Thursday this week, so I really need to pack at some point and things like that. So I'm going to be on Newsmax talking about Guyana at 3:35 p.m. or 3:40 p.m., something like that, Eastern Standard Time today. I already did one live broadcast on Newsmax today about that subject, and it is something for us to keep an eye on. What I would wonder is whether or not Iran or Russia or North Korea, because they're all in cahoots, would go and start giving weapons to Venezuela. Now, Venezuela bought a lot, and I mean a lot, of Russian or Soviet era weapons when Hugo Chavez was their president, and oil prices were high. Their oil industry was at its peak, and they were flush with cash. They had all kinds of money, and so they loaded up on Russian or Soviet military hardware, but they haven't been able to buy any in the last 10 years at all, really much. But the nature of war has changed. And since the nature of war has changed to now drone warfare, and they are building those drones could actually strike the United States. And so if the US were to get involved, bunch of Iranian drones start hitting Houston, and hitting like oil processing plants, refineries, things like that in Houston. Obviously, we are then at war with Venezuela, and if we're at war with Venezuela, that could expand to further conflict with Iran and everybody else. Have you ever thought about that? The United States doesn't have anti-missile capability in the homeland because we've never imagined any of our adversaries or enemies being able to, come after us that way. But, well, guess what? Maybe at some point we might need it. I don't know. That's hard to say, but and not likely. But at the same time, it's a possibility, folks. It's a definite possibility. So, what are your questions about that? Would Cuba get involved? Cuba already has troops in Venezuela, something like, I want to say about 20,000 at one point. Or maybe it was only 2,000. Sorry. Maybe it was only 2,000 troops. Hang on just a second. These guys are just getting crazy with the TV, with the construction over there. So I just told them to knock it off for a few minutes. So I lost my train of thought. Can we get Iron Beam from Israel to counteract drone attacks? Iron Beam is not up and running, fully functional yet. It's still in the testing phase. So no. What is the name of the town you live in, and where the tourists are not? And when are the tourists not there? The tourists are not here anytime from about. Well, I mean, there's holiday weekends they come up, but the tourists are not here from about April to November. For the most part. And that's rainy season, but it's not that rainy. And this is the windy season, but today is not that windy, and that's a good thing. But the bottom line is, and it's Anton Valley is where we live, to answer your question. All right, so yeah, we didn't learn from Pearl Harbor. We do not have that kind of capability, and we don't have enough of that capability to even begin to cover the United States with. Yeah, I did whistle at the construction workers. They're back there building on the monkey cage, but I can't hear myself think because they're sawing on stuff, and I need to get them to shut up for a few minutes. Now, let's talk about what's the final analysis here. The final analysis is that somebody is going to benefit from the light, sweet crude that is offshore of Guyana. Either the Guyanese are going to benefit from it, or the Venezuelans are going to benefit from it. Who benefits from it will have a direct impact on the other conflicts that are going on around the globe. Because, as I said, they are going to affect the wars in Ukraine. They're going to affect the need for oil in Western Europe, et cetera, et cetera. So this is an important conflict that we need to, keep track of. They have elections coming up also in Venezuela, and this is one way that Nicolas Maduro can make the Venezuelan people, who have been suffering greatly. I mean, the average, the rate of poverty, people that live on, below the poverty line, and I'm not talking about the U.S. poverty line. I'm talking about like $3 a day. The number of people in Venezuela that live below the poverty line is absolutely staggering at this point. They've lost about 6 million people out of a total population of about 40 million. And I mean 6 million that have left the country. There are, the government has had to resort to basically bribing gangs of criminals to do their law enforcement for them, to do the functions of the border police and the military. They've got gangs called colectivos that are spread out all along the border with Colombia, for example, that their pay is what they can extort from the people. Criminality is rife in Venezuela. It's the only way people can survive, really. The only growth industries are like kidnapping, sex trafficking, things like that. And there is a new, I want you to pay attention to this. I want you to think about this new transnational criminal organization called El Tren de Aragua. El Tren de Aragua. The Tren de Aragua is essentially a competitor for MS-13. It is a massive now gang that has they have people in the United States. Tren del Agua now has factions in Chicago and Washington, D.C. and New York. If you saw recently the woman in New York, they were a bunch of Venezuelan migrants who were stealing phones. And this woman, they grabbed her phone, but it was hooked to her, but with a sling or something. And they ended up dragging her down the street with it. If you saw that video, the guys the criminals that perpetrated that were members of Tren del Agua. The guys who beat up the two policemen in New York, and were immediately released and then flipped off America when they were released, they were Tren del Agua. The Venezuelan gang that is doing, they're doing home invasions down in Miami, Tren del Agua. And they're involved in extortion, racketeering, human trafficking, sex trafficking, illegal gold mining, drugs. I mean, every criminal activity there is. And they've been coming up through the Darien Gap here in Panama in the flow of Venezuelan migrants. We've seen them. I've seen these guys. You can tell they're gang members because of their tattoos and everything. And they're headed right into the United States. So Nicolas Maduro he needs something to distract his people from, not water train, not Tren del Agua. It's Tren de Aragua. Aragua is a state in Venezuela. And the gang started there. There's a prison there where their gang leader ran the gang from the prison. And the prison, they raided the prison back in September of last year. And they found that prison had swimming pools, restaurants, a disco. They had a brothel. They had this was not like any prison you've ever heard of. That's for sure. Anyway, that's where they started, is the state of Aragua. Anyway, the president, Maduro, he needs something to distract the people from the misery that they've been facing. And, nothing pulls people together like a war. And so he's, whipping up patriotic fervor for the country by rewriting all the maps overnight. And they're all very hopeful in Venezuela that this will result in a lot of new oil that will really help the country of Venezuela if they're able to pull it off. But according to the United States, that's not going to happen. So we'll see. We'll see. I wonder. Nobody's asked Donald Trump about how he would, respond to this. But I also wonder how the U.S. would respond under Joe Biden. I just don't know, because Joe Biden actually lifted sanctions on Venezuela when the war started in Ukraine to try to use Venezuelan oil to sort of, put some more oil into the system that Russia was taking out. And that didn't go so well. That only funds a corrupt, socialist regime. So it'll be interesting to see how they play this. I think they would probably, they're obviously flying combat patrols over Guyana now, so they might send troops down there. I don't know. That's all they would have to do. You could send literally one company of American troops to Guyana and just put them there and just say, boy, if anything were to happen to them and it was Venezuela that did it, That would be really, really bad for Venezuela. That's all it would take. But we'll see. We'll see. I'm not sure that anybody in America is excited to put more American boys and girls on the line anywhere around the world. But that's the way it goes. Somebody says, "Are there big bugs here?" Yes, there are big bugs here, but not a lot. And where I like, we don't even use screens most of the time on our windows because there are not a ton of bugs, especially here in the mountains up high where we are. So that is all I've got for today, and I got a bunch of other reporting I got to do for Newsmax and CBN. So I'm going to have to let you go. But God bless you all, and thank you for watching. If you have further questions, you can send me an email, hotzoneholton@gmail.com, or please go to chuckholton.com or chuckholton.locals.com. It's the same thing. chuckholton.com. You can support me over there. If you like this kind of reporting and you feel like you're learning something here, buy me a coffee. You can support me over there, and that helps me to be able to go where I want to go and not just where the news agencies want me to go, because I'll have that kind of freedom. So the ultimate goal is to be able to completely support myself from what's going on at chuckholton.com, and then support other people, single mothers and people that are hurting from what YouTube brings in, and that'd be a pretty great way to play it. But God bless you all. Thank you very much for watching, and I will be back again most likely tomorrow. We'll see what happens.